Please complete the polls and submit questions in the chat box at your leisure. We have already entered questions that we have received, and we will answer as many questions as possible at the end of the panel. We are very excited that we have a lot of participants for today's event, so we recommend that you also use the speaker view, which is in the top right corner of your screen, for the best experience. Without further ado, I would like to introduce Cynthia Handrup, the president of the Global Alliance for Behavioral Health and Social Justice. Thank you, Cynthia. 1 second, you need to unmute yourself.
Good morning, and thank you for joining us. My name is Cynthia Handrup. I am the current president of the Global Alliance, and I just want to say a little bit about us. I think most of you know who we are, but I see some new faces. We were formed in 1923, and we were founded as the American Ortho-Psychiatric Association. Ortho was, when it was founded, and still is, a very interdisciplinary group, a common meeting ground for individuals that are engaged in interdisciplinary practice and research of mental health, social problems, and human development. The founders, when they founded Ortho, they used a simple revolutionary idea in 1923, which is that the mental health of individuals depends on their social context. Today, our membership consists of diversely trained individuals. We have lawyers, social workers, pediatricians, childcare workers, anthropologists, educators, nurses, biologists, economists, psychologists, psychiatrists, sociologists, journalists, and lay people, all concerned with mental health in broad scope. Though our name changed in 2016, we did name change from the American Ortho-Psychiatric Association to the Global Alliance for Behavioral Health and Social Justice. Though we went through this name change, our tradition of focusing on the needs and rights of people with little voice in society is as strong as it was in 1923. And so it's with that purpose in mind that we were proud to present the screening of Unsettled on Thursday and this panel discussion today. So let me introduce the 4 members of our panel. If you are visible, maybe if you could raise your hand so we could see who you are. The first, Lucy Meyer, is a UK human rights barrister. She specializes in representing particularly vulnerable victims of human trafficking, domestic violence, torture, and sexual or other forms of exploitation, as well as the LGBTQ plus individuals in their immigration and asylum cases. She has also volunteered as a legal advisor in refugee camps in Greece during the Mediterranean refugee crisis. Lucy previously worked in the fields of human rights and refugee for over a decade, including for the international NGO Human Rights Watch, during which time she had covered events in the Middle East from Jerusalem. Lucy has a law degree from Manchester Metropolitan, UK, a master's in human rights from Columbia University. Lucy's former guest, Megan, is our second panel member. Megan is a former badminton star from Uganda, who along with her partner Lydia, also from Uganda, fled persecution from the government and the public to start a new life in the UK. Our third panelist is Jessica Goodkind. Jessica is a community psychologist at the University of New Mexico and Associate Vice Chancellor for Diversity Education for the University of New Mexico Health Science Center. Her research addresses the mental health consequences of stressful social environments and involves developing and assessing processes that promote healing, well-being, and social justice. She founded the Refugees Wellbeing Project, which has brought together thousands of university students and newly resettled refugees to learn from each other and engage in collective efforts to mobilize resources with the goals of improving mental health and creating sustainable changes in communities. The community's receptiveness to refugees and policies that affect refugee resettlement. Jessica is also a Global Alliance board member. And our fourth panelist is Virginia Gill-Riveros. Virginia is a professor of psychology and director of the doctoral program in health psychology at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte. Her research is focused on identifying factors at multiple levels that contribute to successful adjustment among individuals exposed to major negative life events. For example, serious illness, disasters, mass trauma, violence, and forced migration, and chronic adversity, such as poverty, discrimination, and chronic health conditions. She's also been involved in the development, implementation, and evaluation of brief health interventions that are culturally and contextually appropriate. Virginia is also a Global Alliance board member. So welcome to our panelists. And I'm going to turn it over to our first panelists, Lucy Mayer and Megan. Lucy?
Thank you. Thank you very much for the introduction. And sorry, I think my computer is trying to do more than one thing at a time. Now, if you give me one moment. Sorry, everybody. I need to stop that. Can everybody else hear that in the background? Mm-hmm. Okay. I can't see how to stop that. Apologies. Give me one moment.
There you go.
I don't know how to make that stop.
Lucy, is it your computer or a phone nearby?
For some reason, it won't stop on my computer.
Perhaps maybe we can, oh, did you stop it?
No.
I think I did. Yeah.
Good.
Oh, excellent.
Oh,
Okay.
yeah, we can hear you, and so yeah.
Welcome,
Okay.
Lucy.
So sorry, everybody. That was a really, really inauspicious start, but let's hope it's uphill from there. Thank you so much for the introduction and for inviting me to join the panel today, and for letting me watch the documentary film, which was, I'm sure to everyone who watched it, very, very moving in many regards. And I'd like to touch upon just a couple of overarching concepts first that people may have also picked up on from watching the film. And I don't want to get bogged down in legalese, but I wanted to quickly just look at the distinction between refugees and asylum seekers. And of course, what you all may have picked up on from the film is that in the film, we see the stories of 4 people who come to the UK, 2 of whom, Junior from Congo and Subi from Syria, come to the US already recognized as refugees. And that means that their claim to face persecution in their home country has already been accepted. And in some senses, therefore, we'd say that Junior and Subi are in a more favorable position when they enter the US because they don't have to go through the asylum process. They don't have to prove that they face persecution in their home countries and to try and seek being recognized as refugees. But notwithstanding that recognition and that supposedly more favorable process, and notwithstanding the fact that they are part of a sponsorship program, so they're resettled with the assistance, as we see in the film, of various community groups or individuals. But as I say, notwithstanding that, we see that they face a huge number of obstacles in trying to settle in the US. And that includes housing insecurity, problems accessing employment and financial support, mental and physical health problems, some of which are as a result of the persecution they've previously faced, problems forming new intimate relationships in the US, and isolation, a lack of any form of family support, because of course most of them have been victimized by not just the government or the public in their home communities, but also by their own families. And I think one of the advocates in the film points out how difficult it is for those who come to the US, even, as she says, if they're white, even if they speak English. And of course, she goes on to say that LGBT plus refugees are doubly vulnerable because they've left their countries and their families, and they've experienced trauma, if not torture, and they've been rejected by their communities. And that's, of course, in direct distinction from many other refugees who may have been fleeing from political persecution, war, etc., who may, even if they're temporarily separated from their families, still have the support and the love and the guidance of other family members. So that's why, as it's Melanie, I think, who says in the film, LGBT refugees are doubly vulnerable. And here in the UK does resettle recognized refugees, such as Subi and Junior that we see in the film, but a very small number of them, mostly vulnerable refugees from Syria in recent years, and that only amounts to some thousands of refugees. So it's a very, very small number. And instead, the vast majority of those who come to the UK fleeing persecution fall into the second category I wanted to distinguish, as I say, refugees from asylum seekers. And that means, of course, that they still have to go through the extremely difficult asylum seeking process. And that's reflected in the film in the experiences of Marie and Cheyenne from Angola. And you'll see in the film that they entered the US on student visas. Of course, many people fleeing persecution have to find, firstly, a legal route of exit from their own countries and into the country where they're seeking asylum, such as trying to apply as students or workers or family members or visitors. But then once they arrived in the US, of course, they only had temporary visas and they had to begin in the asylum seeking process. And I think the film does a very good job of demonstrating some of the unique problems of asylum seekers in the US. Of course, that is reflected in Marie and Cheyenne's need to find a pro bono lawyer because they don't have any free legal support provided by the US government. Difficulties with lack of financial support, destitution, they run out of money, they're not allowed to work until some point in the process of seeking asylum. And then the very difficult asylum interview that their lawyer helps them prepare for. And you can see how terrifying that process is to them. And one of them says, I think it's Cheyenne, says, well, what if they ask us intimate questions? How will we respond to that? Very real fears that are reflected. Of course, Marie and Cheyenne's asylum seeking process, in a sense, ends again very favorably in that they're granted asylum, or a recommendation is made that they be granted asylum by the Department of Homeland Security. My role actually comes in later than anyone we meet in the film. I represent asylum seekers who have been refused asylum by the government agency in the UK. It's called the Home Office. And after the asylum interview and the decision that Marie and Cheyenne go through, and then have to go on to try and vindicate their claims before an immigration judge in court. And I think the very brief points I wanted to make before turning to Megan, who will be able to speak firsthand, having been through this process herself with her partner Lydia. That process, both of seeking asylum and having to go for an interview with a government official, and then very frequently in the UK, we know the majority of LGBT refugee or asylum claims are refused in the first instance. And then secondly, having to go before a judge and prove your sexuality and prove that you've already faced persecution from family, community, and government, and then prove that you would be at a real risk of facing that persecution again if you were returned, is an incredibly traumatizing and dehumanizing experience. And I think it's made all the harder for refugees from an LGBT background. Again, for reasons picked up well in the film. I think it's Subi who says, it's so difficult to have to speak about these things openly, issues that you've kept so hidden for so long because of the imminent risk of abuse and death if you were to reveal your sexuality or speak about your sexuality openly. To then expect someone to have to come and to present that, those intimate details, those details about their identity, about perhaps coming out to a potentially very hostile, interrogative government official, and then in the second instance, as I say, for many of our clients, before a potentially also hostile immigration judge. And in the UK, we refer to the way that the government agency makes asylum decisions as being a culture of disbelief. And that is that asylum claimants are disbelieved unless and until they can prove that they're credible. And it's, of course, a reversal of what should be the burden of proof. And then the process before immigration judges, as I say, can be equally, there can equally be a culture of disbelief, because we have to remember that asylum officials and immigration judges are products of their society. And unfortunately, both in the US and the UK, I think we'd all agree, we still live in homophobic societies. We still live in societies that have stereotypes and often reflect discrimination against not just asylum seekers, but LGBT individuals, even within our own societies. And just to give one example of this, there was a very well-publicized case in which, not a case I was involved in, where an immigration judge said that he was rejecting this individual's claim because the client, quote, did not have a gay demeanor. And he contrasted the claimant to one of the claimant's witnesses who came to court in support of the claim, who the judge found to be more obviously gay because of the way that the witness dressed, wore lipstick, etc. And the judge pointed to all of these things in his decision to say that he accepted the witness was gay, but he didn't accept the claimant was gay, as I say, because he didn't, quote, have a gay demeanor. That's obviously an unlawful decision, and it was happily quite a long time later overturned. But that's one example I wanted to give. And finally, I just wanted to point to the difficulty that those who have who've come from a culture where and a society where not only, as I've mentioned, is it so difficult to speak openly about your identity, but perhaps where sexuality doesn't form part of one's traditional notions of identity. So cultures where identity might be based more on tribe, ethnicity, and those kind of features, but not on notions of sexuality. And then having to go and answer questions from either an asylum official or perhaps before an immigration judge as to how someone came to form their sexual identity, how they came out, what their feelings and experiences of that were, when that may not correspond in any way to the cultural and personal context of that claimant. And then finally, I just wanted to try and end on a somewhat more positive note, and just to say that despite the fact that there is still huge difficulties and huge gulfs in the treatment of LGBT asylum seekers, that there have been some small improvements that we can point to, at least in the UK system. I don't know how it corresponds to the US system, but up until 2010, the vast majority of LGBT claims asylum claims were refused in the UK on the basis that it was said that those applicants could simply go back to their violently homophobic societies in some cases and live discreetly. So trying to force LGBT claimants back into the closet and saying that the way to protect themselves against persecution was to hide their identity. Horrifying that that was prevalent until 2010 in the UK, but thankfully, due to a landmark case called HJ Iran, no longer the state of asylum law in the UK. And since 2010, therefore, there's been huge strides made because that's not an answer to someone's fear of persecution. And then secondly, there's been another legal victory, and this was in a European court, but has implications for our case law here in the UK, which was to say that the way to prove sexuality was not through conduct or behavior, not having to prove that someone had engaged in conduct or behavior that demonstrated their sexuality, but rather, as I say, on broader notions of identity, difficult as those are often to prove or to talk about, at least a move away from a previous practice which required people really, as Cheyenne was worried about in the film, to have to talk about, demonstrate, bring photographs, bring videos to show that they'd engaged in same-sex conduct. So that's another welcome legal development. So all we what we're trying to do as lawyers in the UK is to continue to press the case law forward to set more positive precedents, and also to lobby for changes to the approach of the asylum authorities in the UK. Still, much better guidance has been issued now by the Asylum Office, but of course there's a big gulf between guidance and practice. So pushing for better both guidance, training, and also practice in deciding these claims, and where they fail, continuing to just use all of our resources to fight them in the immigration courts, hopefully one victory at a time. So thank you for letting me give that brief overview. And I just wanted to introduce now Megan, and ask Megan if she can share some insights that she has. I had the huge privilege to represent Megan and her partner Lydia in 2017 after their asylum claim, their bid for asylum had been refused, and in fact it was their second experience of having to take their case before an immigration judge, and thankfully, due to their bravery and their persistence, their claim did succeed before an immigration judge in 2017, and they're now recognized refugees in the UK. And as I think was pointed out in the introduction, Megan has another claim to fame, which was that she was a world-class athlete representing the the Ugandan badminton team, most recently before she fled Uganda in the Glasgow Commonwealth Games. And so I just wanted to, again, thank you, Megan, so much for joining us today. I don't know if Megan's unmuted now.
Hi, everyone.
Great. Hi, Megan. So Megan, I was just wondering if you could share with us what your thoughts were after watching the film Unsettled, and how it maybe resonated with you.
As someone that has been a part of this, like, it's been a process in my life that I really brave to talk about, but I find brevity in a way. But after watching the movie, I felt so devastated. Like, you've got to tell your story to people again and again and again and again, and in many times people get judged because of what they say they are, like, given freedom to be who you are. But then the fact that you don't even know the person that you're telling your story to, how they're going to take it, how they're going to feel, or you're even talking to the right person. Because if you keep telling people, I am this person and I am this person, the question is, who is going to believe you? Because at the end of the day, it is not what they believe, it is what you believe that you are. So it's a hard one. It's a really hard one, because most people get abused sexually for the reasons that are basic. But if you see the movie and if you watched it, you see people are being used in many relationships just first because they don't have financial support and they're looking for someone to support them. So they'll force themselves into doing something that they're not really happy to do, but because of vulnerability, they'll end up doing it. And then you see people abused because they don't have shelter, like they don't have anything, anywhere to sleep. They, instead of ending up on the streets, they would rather end up with someone that they're not really committed to or intimate with, but because they've got their own reasons of moving in with someone, they'll definitely go in for it. So I personally, I and my partner were homeless for about 3 weeks. Like, that was really mad, like looking up to who I was before and what I was then, from a star to someone sleeping on the streets with all that I hold. It was really, really, I mean, I'm grateful. It's a part of life that I have to talk about, and it's an experience that I would live to talk about. It's a bit negative, but in a way positive to me, because I never thought, many times you see people on the streets and you're like judging them. You don't even know why they end up on the streets. But because I have been there, I know not everybody that is on the streets is a drug addict, or is, there are very many vulnerable people that go to the streets for reasons. And then going back to my case, the fact that you tell somebody your story and they don't believe you, and they ask you to give evidence, you ask for intimate evidence from my country, and I'm telling you, my country it's very illegal to be gay in my country and you're still asking for evidence from back home. That is really, really ridiculous to me. So no matter how many times you try to tell people who you are, and no matter how many times you try to convince people, and no matter how other people that you think know you better try to convince people, they'll never believe you. And I think at some point they'll say, "Oh, right, we believe you just to please you, or just to get rid of you or get rid of your case because they've seen you many times." And it sounds like a broken record, like you're coming with the same story every single day. So to me, there has to be something done about the whole process, because most of the times when you go, because there's more like 4 sections of interviews. The first interview is at the airport. If you're not smart enough, you will have to go back right away. And then the second interview is when you're having a screening interview, when you have to tell somebody why you're there. They're not listening to the reasons why you're there, but they're just looking at you because probably I am from a minority group, because that is another reason they always believe it's people from other races that could be gay, that it's very, you can't be gay when you're coming from Africa. I mean, if you believe that I can't be gay when I'm coming from Africa, how do you then believe that, there's many questions there. So after the screening interview, you have to go for a substantive interview where you have to tell your story. And then sometimes you meet people that could be Muslims. They're already biased by the case. And then secondly, you meet with a lawyer that handles your case from the start, and they're biased. You are gay and they are Muslims, or they don't believe in that, or they're homophobic. That person is not going to fight for you at all. They're not going to fight for you, and you only got one chance of a legal aid. So if you see, because we didn't know we could say no to a judge, to a lawyer before, because we knew maybe we don't have a choice. We go with the flow. Like if they say this is your lawyer, you don't have a chance to ask for who you want to sit in court for you. So like you tell someone your story and they're like, in a way, shedding your story, because at the end of the day, they feel this is not where I'm supposed to be. Because if you go represent someone that's gay and if you're from a Muslim background, there's no way it's going to work. And then you're from a minority group. So it's really hard that sometimes they even feel like someone said there that they give financial support. Yes, they do give financial support, but they do it like it's a way of feeling pity for you, which shouldn't be the case. If I am entitled to support, then I should happily receive the support. If I have shelter and why would you send me out of, I've been vulnerable and you've given me a house, and then because my case is no more, you're sending me out on the streets again, yet I still have chances of an appeal. Because when my first case was refused, they sent me out of the house. So because I had many people I had met friends with, I went on with my badminton in Liverpool and represented county level. I had friends, so friends offered accommodation and support and emotional, and there was a lot going on in my life then. But at the end of the day, they don't look at all that. They don't look at your mental state. They don't look at your physical state. They don't look at nothing. They'll just look at what you tell them and judge you basing on what you say and your color. And then it leaves you with very many questions. So if your case is refused in the UK for the first time, that you'll have a chance to appeal in court. So you've got as many chances as you can to appeal in court. But at the end, at some point in the line, they'll refuse you, and you've got to present what they call, oh my God. So after your case, your appeals have been refused, you have to put in a fresh claim. So if you can't put in a fresh claim, your support stops, right from financial, accommodation, and everything stops. So that then puts you back to vulnerability, if you know what I mean. So it's a very hard process. And after watching all that and seeing what all these girls and boys are going through, it just reflects back to me. And it took me a lot to watch the movie and finish it, because I was like reading my own story again. Because it's been 3 years ago after I had my step, but it still reflected back to me and brought up all the memories, because people have been homeless. You tell someone, they don't believe you. You, however much you try to make them believe you, because at the end of the day, I do not want to make you believe me. No, it is what I am saying that I believe in. I don't ask you to believe me. You don't have to believe me, but you've got to do an assessment and see what is going on, and that is all. But when they listen to you, they say, we don't believe you. You don't have to believe me. At the end of the day, you have to take what I'm saying because it is coming out of me. I come from a Black minority group. People back home, you'll never stand anywhere and tell people, this is who I am. In public, no. So if I open up to you and tell you who I am with the fear that I have, with the trauma that I faced before, and you still say, no, it just puzzles my brain up.
Megan,
it just really puzzles my brain up. Yeah.
thank you so much for sharing this with us and what you've gone through. It's amazing. Your story is amazing. And thank you so much. Lucy, thank you also. And right now I'd like to go to the next panel member, Jessica Goodkind, and then we'll come back later with questions. Jessica?
Thanks, Cynthia. Hi, everyone. And thank you so much to Megan and Lucy for sharing your firsthand perspectives. I just want to add briefly, so I am the chairperson of the Global Alliance for Behavioral Health and Social Justice. We have a task force that's focused on migrants and displaced persons. And I'm the chair of that task force, and we basically focus on the mental health and health disparities and rights of refugees and other people who are displaced due to violence, persecution, economic instability, food insecurity, and climate change. And so we have a lot of efforts on the task force that are related obviously to Megan's situation and to the film. And so I wanted to let you all know about the task force and encourage you right now, anyone who's interested in joining. One of the things that we have been specifically focused on, and I want to comment recently, is the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on refugees and immigrants and asylum seekers, because I just want to add that, hearing the difficulties that Megan faced and seeing in the film, that this has really been exacerbated by right now people are unable to leave. Countries are using the COVID-19 pandemic as an excuse to shut down borders even further. So I wanted to mention that. And then I just wanted to really build on what Megan was saying, because I think what I really appreciate about your comments, Megan, is just talking so much about how it shouldn't be about what other people believe, right? Because it's your story and your experience. And I think that's so important for us to remember. And, Megan talked a lot about the vulnerabilities that she and other asylum seekers and LGBTQ refugees face. And I also want to just really mention, and we saw this in the film too, but to remember the incredible strengths that people have to have made it through these situations and to go through this re-traumatizing process of telling their story over and over again. And that I really resonate with the point about, you don't want to be pitied and you don't want to be judged. You want people to recognize who you are and what you've been through. And I think it's so important that we all recognize the strengths that LGBTQ refugees and asylum seekers bring, and figure out ways in our communities to build on those and recognize what people really have to contribute to our communities and how much we can learn from them. And I think, watching the film, it's so important to realize that I think sometimes, maybe in the US or the UK, we feel like things have come really far in terms of LGBTQ rights, even though we know there's still a long way to go. But to really recognize what people are facing, and that it's not just also due to their sexual orientation, but because of race and racism, as Megan mentioned, I think is really huge. And to understand these intersections and to realize that for many refugees and asylum seekers who are LGBTQ+, it's difficult because they might not even find the community of support of people from their same country. Don't necessarily fit in or aren't welcomed there. And we saw this in the film too, they might try to connect with LGBTQ community in their new resettlement country and might not be understood or really fit in there, and can often be taken advantage of, as we saw in the film and Megan mentioned. So I just wanted to kind of highlight a few of those points to keep in mind. And I look forward to having more discussion together about those and ways that we can really improve not only our legal systems, and I really appreciate Lucy and her work to keep pushing those precedents, but also how we can improve our community's receptiveness and support of LGBTQ refugees and asylum seekers. And the last point, sorry, I want to make one more point, was that in the United States, people have probably been following this, but the Trump administration and previous administrations have made it even more difficult to appeal asylum claims. There are many, many precedents, and I'm not a lawyer and I can't go through them all, but have made it very difficult. And a recent one just came out last week in terms of being able to appeal if, even like Megan mentioned, that first step when you're at the airport or the border, getting turned back there, let alone then an immigration judge and not having the right to appeal that. So we have a lot of work to do, but thank you all, for Lucy and Megan, for what you've done.
Thank you, Jessica. Now I'm going to turn it over to our fourth panelist, Virginia.
Hi, everyone. Virginia Rivas. I go by VGR. And I'm the current chair of the LGBTQ task force. And I'm just so glad that you are joining us in this sort of joint effort between the Migrant and Displaced Persons Task Force and the LGBTQ Task Force in June, which is supposed to be Pride Month. And also we recently celebrated Refugee Day last week, actually. So I'm very excited that you're here. I'm very thankful to Megan for sharing her story. I mean, once again, you are recounting what you went through, and I just admire your courage for being here, for going through all that and watching the film. And for Lucy, for all the work you are doing. There are so many people who are out there trying to work and trying to change the conditions, both at institutional levels, that really make it very difficult for us to uphold the rights of refugees, asylum seekers, and LGBTQ people around the world. So thank you for all that work. I just want to take a few more minutes to tell you a little bit about our task force. Our task force has been around for, I think, now a couple of years. One of our efforts, or many of our efforts, really are around promoting social justice and in various areas, from mental health, behavioral health, just basically creating community conditions that promote the health and well-being of all. And more recently, we have worked on doing some work around providing gender affirmative care in the United States, as well as global examination of where LGBTQ rights are, the violence and persecution that many still face around the world. And we certainly want to provide sort of opportunities for networking like this one, so we can come together and think about how we as organizations and as individuals can move forward with creating a more just society wherever we are. So thank you everyone for being here.
Hey, and thank you, all of you. So we now have some time for questions. We have about 15 minutes, and I was wondering if we have any questions that have come up through the polls or through the chat box. Or if you'd like to type one in now, please do. So one of the questions I had, I know Lucy and Megan, you really shared with us a lot about the experience that you went through in the UK and how that related somewhat to the film. And I was curious about the role of the community. I mean, I know that the process sounds awful, but once that, how the community could help, and what you see as the role of community agencies, just individuals within the community, kind of how people can really, how that influences and how that can be, we can address some of those problems.
Megan, do you want to jump in first, and then I might add a few thoughts?
I think what the community really has to do is just to blow the trumpet, like let one person be a lesson like let's let one person's story be a reference. So because many people go through these things and it's the same thing. So if the community comes up to fight for people like that, like put up conferences like this one, so you understand people really well and what they go through, so you know what you're dealing with. And then if we put up platforms, probably like what can I say, like rallies or demonstrations, just to try to blow that, to blow the noise out there, so the world can know what really goes on, not just the smaller circle, but at a wider circle. So people know really what's going on, that if they are supporting or they're out to support anybody, they know what they're dealing with, other than coming out of the blue and you're like talking about things, but you don't really have an idea of it. So to me, it's not just about giving someone financial support or accommodating someone. No, it's just dealing with the problem itself. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Megan. I think, again, Megan probably could talk a long time about this firsthand, but in the UK, we refer to the system, the immigration system, the history of the immigration system, and current convergence of policies as creating what's called a hostile environment. And unfortunately, that's not just a top-down, but it's now also sometimes a bottom-up, where there's so much hostility towards communities of color, towards migrants, towards LGBT individuals, and where all of these various parts of your identity converge, obviously finding yourself at the very sharp end of a very hostile environment. And I think I like Megan's terminology, blow the trumpet, but we just really need a strong community blowback against that. And it can be really difficult when you feel as though the media, policymakers, and swathes of the general public are participating actively in this hostile environment climate. We do have to fight back, and I think we have to join forces. And I really like, for example, today's forum, which is an intersection of those of you in the Global Alliance working on LGBTQ issues and those of you working on migration issues. And obviously there is an opportunity now with growing movements as part of Black Lives Matter, pro-migration movements, etc. So I think if we can harness that energy and make sure that these different parts of our activist communities work together, then hopefully we can blow the trumpet and we can blow back some of this hostility.
You know, I'm aware that there are people attending this panel from different countries. I know we have representation from the UK, we have representation from the United States, we have Canadian people here. So I'm just curious how, and I don't know where everyone else is from, but I'm curious how different in your country or how in your community you feel refugees are, or asylum seekers are actually thought of, incorporated into the community, and problems addressed and dealt with. So anybody, I think anybody who wants to speak can unmute themselves. Is that correct?
All of our panelists, all of our panelists are currently unmuted.
Okay.
If someone else would like to speak, they can press to have their hand up and I can address that.
I can say something here. I was thinking about this too, you know, after watching the film and just being a part of this panel, and being a part of this panel today, I was thinking, you know, I've been working with refugees here in my community and in the United States for more than 20 years. And I was thinking, just reflecting for myself, and some of what Megan and Lucy mentioned, that for myself as an LGBTQ person myself, I often don't feel comfortable disclosing that in settings where I'm working with a lot of refugees, because many of the refugees that I work with in the Middle East and from different countries in Africa are from religious backgrounds where when it comes up, when LGBTQ issues come up, there's very strong you know, discrimination against that. And it's actually something that we do as part of the Refugee Wellbeing Project. We have discussions, and we really try to approach these issues from, we bring together university students and refugee individuals and families to discuss and learn about each other's cultures. And these are issues that we really try to bring up and talk about and learn from each other. But it's really challenging because people do have really strong held beliefs that you know, don't want to, you know, it's complicated when they're here and newcomers, and I don't want to impose my beliefs on them, but how do we come to understand these? And I was thinking for myself as like a white US citizen who has all this privilege, I still often feel really uncomfortable in those situations. So I just wanted to bring that up.
Yeah, Jessica, thank you for sharing. As being LGBTQ, also an immigrant to this country, I often find that in immigrant communities, there's a lot of homophobia, transphobia, racism, that end up coming together to sort of wedge divisions in efforts to secure sort of human rights and protection for everyone. And so, and as you said, in somewhat a privileged position of being an academic, right? How if that I find that challenging myself is how we are sort of in some ways expecting that those who are in less privileged positions have to navigate not just what is the sort of the trauma and experiences and challenges of just day-to-day living, but also having to find their own communities where in their receiving country who you will hope will provide sort of that kind of cultural context where it's welcoming, that is actually another form of rejection. In many cases of very racist societies, where now there's that other form of discrimination that you are experiencing at a time where you already, certainly by the time you decided to seek asylum, is because many things had already happened and you have real fears for your life and the life of your loved ones.
You know, something I think I'd shared the other day with some of my colleagues from the Global Alliance is that I had several years ago seen a short clip, again, talking about immigration issues and asylum seekers. And it was about a community in Canada and how this community had opened their arms and were, you know, accepting of the asylum seekers that had come over there. And one thing really stuck in my mind, and I always try to remember to do this, and that is one gentleman who, they were in a coffee shop, and one of the, you know, residents of the community went over to an obviously Syrian family and said to them, "I just want to welcome you to our community and tell you that we're glad you're here." And I thought that was such a moving thing to say to someone. Like, how many times do we actually go out of our way to, when we find out someone is, you know, is a refugee or is an asylum seeker, and welcome them and say, "Welcome to our community, and we're glad you're here." So I think that's just a little thing, but to me, it sort of really resonated. I wonder if we could take a few minutes to speak about what the unique mental health needs of the LGBTQ and refugee and asylum seekers. I mean, does anybody have any thoughts about that?
I could say one quick thing, which is that I think one of the challenges we haven't touched on as much, but is language access. And, you know, everyone that we saw in the film, and Megan being from Uganda, you know, everyone we saw in the film could speak English, but I know like here in New Mexico, you know, there are LGBTQ plus organizations, there are, you know, domestic violence organizations. And here if you speak Spanish, if you're an immigrant who speaks Spanish, there's pretty good access. But if you come from any other country and you don't speak English, it's really, really difficult often to build connections with other people and to access services. So that is just another added challenge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. And I think finding communities where there is an understanding of those intersections, right, between the experience of being a refugee and asylum seeker, most likely some experiences of trauma, and then understanding the very unique issues related to homophobia, transphobia experiences that people have had, and then sort of being understanding or being culturally and context appropriate, so that beyond the language, right? How we often try to impose our own worldviews into others, and so having people who are really trained in having an approach that recognizes that we have a bias, multiple biases, but certainly a very expectations that people should be talking about their experiences, their identity, and their lives in ways in which we are comfortable, rather than really sort of understand that there are multiple ways in which people can self-define, right?
I just wanted to chip in too. One thing that I think we've seen a lot in I've seen a lot in my work is that very frequently our clients have experienced trauma and are suffering mental health problems, understandably, as a result of really horrific experiences, not least, as I said, being re-traumatized by the UK asylum process, as I think also Megan was able to really powerfully describe how traumatizing that is. And oftentimes we do try and get some kind of medical assessment for our clients, because that's often also a piece of evidence in their case. And most of the mental health experts we deal with, even ones who work with torture survivors, with migrant communities, etc., very frequently point to the fact that it's a chicken and an egg situation, because for someone to be able to start to receive any form of treatment for any kind of post-traumatic illness or other mental health illness requires a situation of stability. And of course, where you're spending years sometimes, as Megan and Lydia did, or as many of our clients do, just trying to win in your bid for asylum, or trying to normalize your immigration status. There's no continuity, no consistency, and no safe space to even begin to address and deal with underlying trauma and mental health problems. Whereas at the same time, obviously, it's a time when people need it the most, because they're going through such a difficult re-traumatizing process. They need that assistance, they need mental health treatment and support, but then they don't have the stability of status to receive it, a place of safety. So I just wanted to point to that. It's very, very often an intersection that many of our clients find themselves in, that very difficult place for many years.
Thank you.
Can
I
I
think
say
it's obvious that
something?
there are many mental health needs. Did someone else have something to say?
Yeah, I did. And then another situation is when you're like, because here you live in a shared accommodation, and then you're living with heterosexual people, and you are gay, and you don't know how to deal with that. Like if you've got an issue and you try to call they tell you to talk to a counselor, and then calling the counselor, just getting to the counselor, it takes you about 20 to 30 minutes just trying to tell them what you are calling. Like you cannot walk straight to them and say, I know it's protocol, but you take like I'm depressed. Apparently I'm not depressed, I'm just giving an example. Like I have an issue going on, and I try to call for a counselor because they gave me a number from the hospital. So I call the counselor, and they can't see you right away.
Yeah.
And what the doctors do is prescribe antidepressants. And to me, the problem has to be talked about, other than, because you can't cure a problem, you just have to talk about it to resolve it. So that's another one. Like people don't get access to counselors or mental health teams in time. So it lags your brain back, because you still have your case going on, and you still have to deal with your mental stability. You still have to deal with your mental issues. So it's a bit hard for people, especially I have a partner. So I used to, we always have something to talk about. But then for someone that came from, that is in a country that doesn't know English, they don't know who to talk to, they don't know what to say, they're always in their rooms locked up and crying. And that's why we have many suicidal cases, because people don't know who to talk to. Like you don't even have a chance to talk to anybody. The person that you think you could talk to is far away, and you have like 30 minutes of just telling them what you want to talk to them about. Like you don't have immediate access to to such people, you definitely have to keep to yourself and die with it.
Well, yes, and that's so true. And I think what you've pointed out, many weaknesses in our mental health delivery system, and how it is even more pronounced for LGBTQ and asylum seekers. But you've exposed some of the weaknesses in our system. I'm looking at the time and seeing that we have about 2 minutes left, and was wondering if any of our panelists had any words of wisdom that they could give us on something that each of us could do to individually improve this process. If you have any suggestions.
Yeah, I wanted to just add, because it builds on everything that Lucy and Megan said, about Lucy highlighted the stability and the insecurity, and Megan, the access to services and to just someone to talk to. And I just wanted to add that I think another huge aspect for all of us of our mental health is being treated with dignity and respect. And so the more that we can do that and recognize the humanity in each other, I think that's so important. And I know, like Megan said, refugees and asylum seekers, they don't want to be pitied. And obviously they're vulnerable because of circumstances, but that doesn't mean they're not strong people. And we really, that value and respect goes a long way for our mental health.
Yeah. And I think sometimes we think there's not much I can do, right? And I think we can start wherever we are. It may be simple little things, but for some of us, it's sort of questioning how, what is our commitment and how it shows up in every single thing we do, from sort of how we interact with people to if you are in a working for an organization, what is your role to bring these issues up, to address, to continue to sort of put it in the forefront, these issues, right? Because we as societies tend to kind of be shifting all the time. The issues are not resolved and then we move to the next thing. And so finding ways in which we can consistently create supportive spaces for everyone, and in particular for those who are vulnerable, is critical.
Okay. Well, I want to thank everyone for joining us. Thank our panel for your wonderful presentation and the discussion. And thank you to all of our participants who joined us. And just in parting words, of course, we have put all over the place our website, and we'd love to have you join us on the website, and just to find out more about us, and maybe you'll see some ways that you might be able to help. We'd love to have you. So, all right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.